this in one take with no edits. See how it goes. When teaching raps, there are a few key items I like to teach. There's primarily to protect the person throwing the shot, so that they don't hurt their shoulder, they don't hurt especially their elbow. Years ago, in my early days of heavy fighting, I damaged my elbow from throwing raps incorrectly. I've since learned how to do it right, and so this is how I teach the locals here, and teach people how to throw raps. There may be better ways. There may be better ways to teach it. There may be better ways to throw it. This is how I do it, and it tends to work using body mechanics instead of arm movements. But we'll get into that. So what you see a lot in the SCA with people throwing raps is people think a rap is this big loopy shot that goes like this and comes around the shield. But what tends to happen is when you throw a rap like that, because you're reaching, right, and you have this sideways motion from this big loop, is people tend to be lazy, and so they use bone structure for the force. And so what you get is you have this straight arm, okay? And this straight arm is locked. When you strike, when that strikes, it's putting pressure on your elbow because of the rigid bone structure, which can damage the elbow, right? You're still pushing, suddenly your sword stops, your arm stops and locks, and you still have that force on your elbow and can damage your elbow. So you don't ever, just like you would not want to throw a flat snap that came around a regular shot that was big and loopy. You want to drive straight for your opponent. The same goes for a rap. You don't want a big loopy rap necessarily. There are applications for that, but by and large, you don't want these big loopy raps. You want straight raps. And the other advantage to this is a shot that tends to be straighter looks just like your other shots. If my raps look totally different than anything else, it's going to be very easy for my opponent to pick up on them. It's a tell that my opponent will be able to use to defend against my attack. So if this is my flat snap, then my regular rap wants to look like this. Very, very similar, okay? Flat snap, rap. Okay, you see there is a slight change in the angle of the sword because it is a different shot, but it comes very straight, okay? That doesn't always apply because sometimes you're at different ranges. Sometimes you're very close and you need to have a bit of a loop. But what I tend to do is instead of this big arm loop, it's a tip loop, okay? So there may be, you have to get that momentum of the sword whipping around, but it's not a big arm movement. It's a small arm movement, and it's tip movement of the sword. As your shot lands, always have the elbow bent, okay? So that you're using muscle and you have give there. So if it hits unexpectedly hard and you still have body mechanics, your arm isn't already locked. It lands with force just like any other shot would land. If I throw a flat snap, my arm isn't completely locked. It's still landing, so I have a little bit of play in it. The same wants to be for a rap. When throwing the shot, I'm going to move this camera down a little bit here so you can see my hips. So when throwing the rap, you throw it just like a regular shot. Your hips and your shoulders locked together are moving forward. Your shot is out. You roll the wrist to use the back of the blade, and you pull back. So now you're creating a backwards motion with your sword out behind your opponent. So in real time, okay, shot goes out, you roll the wrist, the hip comes back, and the shoulder with it, moving the sword back towards you, which strikes the back of the blade into the back of your opponent. that's using body mechanics to create the power instead of a whippy tip or all this arm force to try and pull the weapon back. It's the same if I hit you straight on with no body mechanics, just arm. Yeah, the first couple shots might be hard enough, but then my arm is tired out and it won't be hard enough. If I use body mechanics, right, I can throw that shot all day and it'll be a good shot all day. The same goes for the wrap. That's pretty much all there is to it. It's very simple. It's not difficult to throw. It needs to be done very slowly at first. Wraps can be thrown from any range. A lot of people say, oh, wraps are for where you're in really close. You're at that bad breath range and you try to throw it around, and that's most often when you see it. But wraps are just simply a slight angle change in the sword that give you a little bit of an advantage, and it can be used at any range. Most effective at a mid-range to close range. But I've used it effectively at all ranges. So again, just to recap, never lock your arm, not big arm movements, small arm movements, if necessary, big tip movements. See there, my arm went out a little bit, but it wasn't this big swinging motion. Use the hips to get the power, to get that snap right at the end. You pull back, okay? And that will put the power into the shot. That's wraps in a nutshell. Any questions?